Have you ever thought about a World Cup where the biggest headlines weren't actually about the goals, but about the politics? Well, that's exactly what happened at the 1938 tournament in France. It was supposed to be a global celebration of sport, but it was held under the darkest of clouds, just 1 year before the world plunged into war.
To really get a feel for this tournament, you have to picture the world in 1938. It was an absolute pressure cooker. Just months before a ball was even kicked, Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss. The brutal Spanish Civil War was raging, and over in the east, Japan was escalating its invasion of China. The entire world was on a knife's edge.
So, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with that political backdrop, then look at the teams that never even made it. We'll cover the wild on-field action, dig into the highly politicized final, and then, finally, reflect on its legacy as the last tournament before everything changed.
All right, first up, a world on the brink. This was never just a sporting event, no way. It was a mirror reflecting the geopolitical chaos of the time. You simply could not separate the football from the rising tide of fascism and the constant threat of conflict.
And get this, France actually beat out Germany for the hosting rights. But even with the tournament on French soil, you couldn't escape the long, dark shadow being cast by its neighbors, Germany under Hitler and Italy under Mussolini.
And all that political tension? Well, it leads us right into our next point. This was a tournament defined just as much by the teams that weren't there as by the ones that were. The global situation had a direct and dramatic impact on who showed up to play.
The reasons why teams stayed home are, well, they're pretty wild. You had the South American powerhouses, Argentina and Uruguay, boycotting the whole thing. They were protesting the fact that Europe was getting to host for the second time in a row. Spain, of course, was being torn apart by its civil war. But the most dramatic story of all, Austria. They actually qualified for the tournament, but before they could play a single game, their country literally ceased to exist.
So the whole tournament kicked off with a really weird number of teams, just 15. Austria's forced withdrawal left this big hole in the bracket, which meant their scheduled opponent, Sweden, got a free pass directly to the quarterfinals without kicking a single ball.
But hey, even with all this political chaos swirling around, the action on the field was absolutely unforgettable. So, let's dive into the incredible drama of the matches themselves, which were packed with unique rules and some just stunning results. This tournament was truly one of a kind. For starters, it was a straight knockout format right from the beginning. No group stage to save you. You lose, you go home. Talk about pressure, right? It was also the first time the host and the defending champs got to qualify automatically, and the first time players wore numbers on their shirts. A whole lot of firsts, including the first ever official own goal in World Cup history. Now, remember how Germany had annexed Austria? Well, they didn't just absorb the country, they absorbed its best football players too. On paper, this created a kind of super team. They were seen as one of the heavy favorites to win the whole thing.
But then, the unthinkable happened. In the very first round, the powerhouse German team was knocked out by Switzerland. And here's where the politics just completely boils over. The German coach Sepp Herberger didn't blame tactics. No. Instead, he went to the press and publicly blamed the newly added Austrian players, accusing them of having a defeatist attitude.
And just to give you some perspective on how massive that upset was, Germany would not be eliminated in the first round of a World Cup again for another 80 years, all the way until their shocking exit in 2018. It was a truly monumental failure for a team with such high, politically charged expectations.
So that brings us to the climax of the tournament, the final. And for the defending champions, Italy, the pressure was just immense. This was about way more than a trophy. It was a chance to project the power of Mussolini's fascist regime on the world stage for everyone to see. And the final against Hungary was an absolute thriller. Italy struck first, but Hungary answered almost immediately. The Italians, however, were just relentless. They scored twice more before halftime, and even though Hungary pulled one back late in the game, Italy sealed the victory in the 82nd minute. The final score 4-2. And with this victory, Italy made history. They became the very first nation to win back-to-back World Cup championships, a feat that wouldn't be repeated for another 24 years. But the story of Italy's victory doesn't just end with the score. They won that final wearing all black jerseys. This was no fashion statement. It was a direct, unmistakable nod to Mussolini's fascist party, the Black Shirts. The sporting victory was very deliberately being framed as a political one.
You know, when that final whistle blew in Paris, nobody knew it would be the last one at a World Cup for 12 long years. The tournament's legacy is probably best summed up by what happened to the trophy itself. To keep it out of Nazi hands, an Italian football official smuggled it from a bank in Rome and spent the entire war hiding it in a shoebox under his bed.
Ultimately, this tournament stands as this really poignant historical marker. It was the last fleeting moment of global sporting celebration before the world was completely torn apart by the Second World War. A brief, fraught, and totally fascinating distraction from a conflict that felt inevitable. And that leaves us with a question that feels just as relevant today as it must have back in 1938. When sport and politics collide on the world stage, what is the real prize that's being won?